Welcome to Raven Talk, the official podcast of the Raven Tribe. The Raven Tribe is a home for warriors on the path, and is dedicated to training warriors for the battlefield of life. Visit us on the web at theraventribe.com, where you can learn more information on membership, warrior training, as well as links to our official YouTube channel, Facebook group, apparel store, and our official bookstore, Marshall Books. Welcome back, Tribe. Today we're here with special guest, Chief Master Mike Gross of the OSM Knife and Tomahawk Throwers Academy. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Mike, for the audience at home who may not be familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the martial arts?
Sure. My name is Mike Gross. I'm a professional knife and tomahawk thrower and instructor. I'm a former knife throwing entertainer, along with my wife Rosa. We had a stage act. I'm a former Pro Tour competitor and champion. My wife Rosa and I have 3 children, 3 grown children, and 11 grandchildren. I'm the founder and chief instructor at my school, OSM Thrown Weapons Martial Arts, OSM Knife and Tomahawk Throwers Academy, and the Mike Gross Thrown Weapons Fighting System. My background in the martial arts began, like many kids, I grew up in the inner city. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I learned the martial part, or trained the martial part of martial arts. Began, at a really young age. 6 years old, I was fighting in the streets of Brooklyn. I was always smaller, so I was an easy target for bullies early on. And kind of had a chip on my shoulder. I wasn't afraid to use my fist to defend myself, and I never really had a problem fighting someone bigger than I was. My older brother used to knock me around pretty good, so I learned to take a good shot or two. But like I said, we came from a broken home, so I had a chip on my shoulder, and it kind of lasted through high school. But thankfully, I grew out of that, and I'm a pretty peaceful, easygoing person. But I trained in boxing, and I wrestled in high school. As far as organized martial arts proper, I'm a certified master thrown weapons instructor under Sensei Mike Bainton, who is the owner and founder of South Austin Karate. As Sensei Mike Bainton is also the executive director of the International Knife Throwers Hall of Fame. I'm ranked in Reality Martial Arts, RMA, and a certified RMA coach under Walt Lysak, Rich Ryan. I'm also ranked in ninjutsu under James Rosenbach and Walt Lysak.
So Mike, you are considered one of the foremost blade throwing instructors in the world. How does somebody get to that point? What can you tell us about how your training evolved and just how you got involved with throwing in the first place?
Well, my informal training started when I was a little kid, throwing pencils into the ceiling at school. It was using a style that I found out, believe it or not, 40 years later. It was called no spin, or jikidaho. I hung out down at the freight yard, the railroad tracks. There's no shortage of railroad spikes, and old worn out railroad ties. We put bottles and cans on the rails, and we throw rocks and spikes at them. And you stand up the ties and throw spikes using. I didn't realize it at the time. I guess I realized it was spinning, but I didn't know what they really called it. So I was just throwing it. I just realized it worked better with a rotational style, or hantendaho style, which means the knife turns or rotates as you throw it. You don't impede or control the spin or slow the spin. You just let it turn on its own. So I was throwing spikes like that. I wasn't very successful, but I didn't have much success at that. Although I did get a good feel of how a piece of steel, something especially short, dense, and heavy like that, affected rotation. I found out quick how a nail, as opposed to a railroad spike, for example, rotates. A thin nail, rotates a lot faster, and it's a lot smaller and lighter. But like any other kid, I suppose I had a jackknife, and I played all those crazy knife games like Mumbly Peg and such. But baseball, really was probably the most important piece of my throwing training, and probably the most foundational part of my throwing. The form, the fluidity of throwing a baseball, building that muscle memory. And when I was a kid, you got to remember that baseball was life to me. There wasn't a day that went by that I wasn't throwing a baseball, playing catch with one of the neighborhood friends. So that form and motion of throwing a baseball, or any ball really, it really transfers nicely to thrown weapons, form and motion. And with the exception, of course, of crossing the arm in front of the body. Baseball, you cross your arm at follow through, whereas not so much with weapons throwing. But overall, it's really similar. Especially the hips regarding torque. It's really important. I've trained in boxing myself, but I also played a lot of baseball. I played a lot more baseball than I did boxing in the ring. So, but when I train boxers, fighters that haven't had any experience growing up playing baseball, I find that they're much tighter, stiffer, and believe it or not, they're a little less fluid, oddly enough, when they first train thrown weapons, as opposed to someone who grew up playing baseball. I can tell right away with a new student if they played a lot of baseball when they were kids. The transition to throwing comes much more natural, in my opinion, than someone who didn't grow up playing baseball, little league, and, as a teenager, high school, college, stuff like that. Especially back in my era when I was growing up, sandlot ball, everybody played every day. That was the way it was. As far as my formal training, that began not really too long ago, although I've been throwing things all my life. My formal training began, on the stage. I've been throwing knives and tomahawks on stage professionally as an impalement artist. You're throwing knives around a human subject, a human target, around a human target, not at a human target. It's funny in knife throwing, they have a lot of terms that really aren't shouldn't be literally taken. Impalement actually means to actually impale. No, I didn't impale anyone, but in the business, that's what they call a stage thrower, or it's been commonly known to be called an impalement artist. And I've been doing that for a few years. I decided I'd like to test my skill against competition sport throwers. I contacted a sport thrower, a knife maker, Joe Dara, who introduced me to the sport, to the folks at the International Knife Throwers Hall of Fame and American Knife Throwers Alliance. They're probably the two biggest sport throwing organizations around. That first tournament, I did awful. My first national tournament I competed in, I did terrible, man, in that first competition. But the following year, I won the whole thing. I swept that event. The next year, I won all the competitions. I won the knife competition, the tomahawk competition, and the mountain man competition, combined knife and hawk. That was my first national championship. I won two more IKTA HOF national championships. I won an AKTA National Tomahawk Championship, and then in 2011 I won the NEA KTA Grand Championship knife and tomahawk combined. And I continued to perform on stage during my competition days, and I toured the States as an impalement artist, a stage thrower with my wife as my target girl. I performed as a stunt thrower, an exhibition thrower. In 2011, I was inducted into the International Knife Throwers Hall of Fame I was named their World Champion Impalement Artist of the Year in 2012. But, having trained in boxing, wrestling, and blade throwing, I decided to dedicate myself to developing a system for throwing weapons, self-defense, and here I am.
Now, Mike, one of the questions that often comes up and a criticism that's often put out there, especially by people in the knife community, is just the general questioning of the value of knife throwing for combat or for self-defense. This is an aspect of knife throwing that you teach. What kind of insights can you share with us on this?
That's a good question, and it comes up a lot. First of all, I believe it's a good thing to question any method that someone teaches if you believe it could be dangerous to the practitioner. What I would caution and don't take seriously is anyone who questions the value of discipline they haven't trained to a high level. In my opinion, anyone who dismisses thrown weapons as having at least some combative value, either doesn't know enough about it or hasn't trained it to a combative, ready skill level. Sometimes people look at weapons throwing with a finite mentality, meaning, they wrongly assume that the thrown weapons martial artist would throw away his weapon. This is a common misconception. My system is designed to accommodate multiple thrown weapons, and we rarely throw away the only weapon we have left to fight with. So, assuming a thrown weapons martial artist only uses one thrown weapon, that's the first wrong assumption when assessing the value of thrown weapons as a viable art to be trained for combat. In fact, I teach my students to be well-rounded, and trained in hand-to-hand combat, boxing, wrestling, striking, grappling disciplines, and firearms. If you're going into battle with your only skill set being thrown weapons, you're a limited warrior. The same can be said of any singular martial arts discipline.
Another question here for you, Mike. Being able to correctly judge the distance for throwing in high-stress situations is often cited as a factor in the belief that throwing has very limited value for combat or self-defense. You've developed a method for judging distance in these conditions. What can you tell us about your method? How does it work? How is it different from other approaches?
Well, stress is a factor for any martial artist that trains for actual combat. So regardless of the method one uses in combat, stress can adversely affect one's ability to execute and perform at a high level of proficiency. Stress elevates heart rate, which it affects the central nervous system. Your breathing, your muscles are going to react differently than they do in normal training conditions. That's why it's important to train as much as possible with distractions. This adrenal stress training is used by all different disciplines in martial arts, from firearms to rally martial arts. I don't think stress plays into thrown weapons any more than it does any other discipline. As far as judging distance, I'm not sure it's really a method I have as much as it is just plain repetitive training. I call it controlled visual distancing. In other words, if you throw 1,000 times from one spot, your weapon does the same thing every time. It always will from that spot, and you will feel it, and through training, and you're going to know it when you're in it, and you're gonna feel it and know it when you're not. There's a lot more to it, but simply put, if you're in a situation where you need to make a throw right away, through repetitive training, I call it trained reactive throwing, you'll know whether you throw from where you are, or if you're going to have to reach in, if you have to pull back, fall back, etc. Your body through training will make the necessary adjustments because you've done it so many times through training. This will become, in other words, natural for you. For example, I can make one full rotation knife or tomahawk from anywhere within an effective fighting zone, say from 2 feet up to 12 feet. Whether it's full rotation or no rotation, I can throw
I could throw anywhere in that zone and stick the weapon, regardless of rotation or distance. How this differs from other methods, I don't really know that it does. I know that some methods will teach that there's only one style that can work in those situations, and I believe that through repetitive training, any style can work. As long as you train it enough and you do it enough, train, and you can make any style work within an effective fighting zone.
So, Mike, when you were learning how to throw, did you study traditional martial methods such as Shuriken Jitsu?
I have studied Shuriken Jitsu, Fernand. It's important to know that traditional Shuriken Jitsu is a minor form of the traditional major martial art form of ninjutsu. I've trained ninjutsu and studied extensively. As I said before, I have rank in ninjutsu under James Rosenbach and Walt Lysek. This question is probably a good opportunity to expand on the last question regarding what's different between my method and other methods. The Shuriken Jitsu I teach it's not traditional Shuriken Jitsu alone. It's only in part based on tradition. I think that tradition is great. I encourage anyone interested in pursuing traditional Shuriken Jitsu to, follow their hearts. But if you're interested in traditional Shuriken Jitsu, you should seek schools with documented lineage. Simply put, the difference, in my opinion, between traditional Shuriken Jitsu and OSM Shuriken Jitsu is that traditional Shuriken Jitsu is based on throws that cause distraction enough to draw a sword, and that's a simplification, to be sure. It's a beautiful art. OSM Shuriken Jitsu is a more modern approach, where throws are not only intended for distraction, but also throws with, lethal potential. The lethality in the form of a tomahawk. Quite frankly, the tomahawk isn't traditionally trained in Shuriken Jitsu. It's my opinion that it's a bladed weapon, obviously, and can be, when customized and used correctly, it can be concealed sufficiently to incorporate an element of surprise and potential lethality to stop an attacker bent on killing you. So I believe that it's tailor-made and a great weapon for combat, thrown weapons, self-defense. The tomahawk design I've created, and the way it's held and used in the hand is the key to my thrown weapons fighting system. In our Kamakiri form, for example, which is a two tomahawk form, the tomahawk is held in the left hand by the head rather than the handle. The blade head obviously has to be customized to allow the hand to grip it using a traditional fist, making a traditional fist while keeping the blade exposed. This differs than traditional tomahawk fighting techniques, which are mostly used by holding the tomahawk by the handle. In my opinion, has more potential to be hooked, trapped, or have it disarmed. Either way, blade or handle held, the tomahawk is a fairly easy weapon to grab, hold, trap. It's easy to do that for the keen warrior. And I wouldn't say easy, but it has that flaw. That's why I teach students to hold it by the blade and make quick, sewing needle type strikes in the form of left jabs, left hooks. Striking, bring it back, the weapon lightning fast, quick. It's got to be quick. This is essential. Holding the hawk by the handle to strike requires swinging it, which gives a keen warrior time to grab it. Other techniques require a looser grip on the handle that opens the door, again, for losing your weapon. But the technique I've developed allows maximum weapon retention while still having that cutting and crushing, penetrative and blocking potential. The tomahawk, strikes that I've designed are specifically to set up or follow up throws. using another Tomahawk, spike, or any other kind of weapon, a thrown weapon anyway, Senbon, Hero, Shuriken, Star, to throw. And all these weapons can obviously be held in the hand to fight with as well. These techniques, they're all based on specifically trained forms that we do. Footwork and hand speed is essential, and I specifically designed those things to control distance against an attacker. Closing distance and causing separation are really the key for the thrown weapons fighter to be successful. That's why we train spatial awareness so much. Throwing on a move and it targets that move in an unknown path is another essential part of training. To hit a target that moves in an unknown path, one must close the distance. Obviously, to within an effective fighting zone, which I believe is between 3 to 6 feet or less. I don't see the benefit of training throws, beyond that. Training throw long distance is something I've done, and I've been successful with it. I've thrown successfully spin throws beyond 25 feet, but I don't believe training those distances are realistic for combat. Some might make the argument that, like shooting, firearms training at longer distance is beneficial, and I believe that it is beneficial for shooting, and it is invaluable for training at closer distances as well. And in shooting, this is true, but for throwing, not so much. Throwing, is a body in motion. Shooting is not. The trigger pull remains the same for a shot at 20 yards or a shot at 200 yards. Throwing is quite different in that the body throwing from 5 feet, moves much differently, considering the body having to generate maximum power in a throw. It moves a lot differently than it does when you're throwing from 25 feet. My system's based on common sense, For example, to hit an enemy attacker, you have to strike quickly and closely. Quickly and closely enough that even when the enemy moves, it'll be too late. It'll be too late for the attacker to react. Just imagine, for yourself, just imagine you as a thrower facing an attacker separated by 25 feet. First of all, why would you throw at all? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. Secondly, wouldn't you think the attacker can clearly see your arm and body moving? Obviously, to me, to me and the martial artists and self-defense professionals that have trained with me can clearly understand that. We train this very drill. Certainly weapon traveling 25 feet will give the attacker plenty of time, not only to avoid the throw, but to retrieve your weapon and use it against you. In my opinion, throwing long distance and trick throws are not combat ready, and it really shouldn't be trained for that purpose, if training throws for combat is your intended purpose. I think trick throws are great. I think throwing long distance is great. It's an amazing amount of skill. I've seen things done from long distance and at moving targets in trick throws that just are amazing, elite throwing skills, in my opinion. But those things aren't combat-ready throws. I teach students to train their bodies to throw from distances that they're most likely to throw in combat scenarios. That would be 3 to 6 feet, no further than 10. Your legs, arms, shoulders, hips, they're going to move a lot different from 6 feet than they do at 25 feet. Unless you're just, lobbing it in there for sport or recreation, then it makes sense. At that point, that's great for sport throwing. You can pretty much, just lobbing it in, you can pretty much keep your same motion and simply raise your point of aim. But that's sport throwing. We're talking about combat. You'll need quickness, power, and accuracy. That won't come from lobbing it in from a comfortable, relaxed stance. It's not going to happen. And going back to tradition, just for a minute, my goal is for my students to eventually come up, with their own way of throwing, their own style, so to speak. I don't want them to rely on tradition I want them to understand tradition. I want them to study tradition. And I want them to train in traditional martial arts. But I want them to be open to creativity, to explore. Once basic fundamentals are learned, I want them to be open to their own way, learn their own way, develop their own styles and methods and systems. Tradition, it's finite. Creativity is infinite. I say be creative, In our systems, most forms use one thrown weapon in each hand, either a knife, hawk, or spike, or two hawks, two knives, two spikes. You either fight with them held in the hand, or you can throw them. The important thing to remember is that once a weapon is thrown, there has to be follow-up. Follow-up, can take many forms. It can be many things. It can be drawing another weapon to fight with or to throw with. It can be an escape maneuver for follow-up. It can be an evasion tactic for follow-up. It can be a punch, a kick. It can be drawing a firearm, grappling, wrestling, groundwork. It could be a block. It could be another defensive tactic. But there has to be follow-up to a throw. There has to be. We have to always remember that the effectiveness of any martial art combat, really, it's based in large part on the level and skill and knowledge of the martial art. For the martial artist, has to know really what they're doing, and that's always weighed against the skill of our opponent. So again, its effectiveness is based on the skill level and the knowledge level of the martial arts practitioner for thrown weapons or any other martial art. And we got to keep that in mind. That thrown weapons or any martial art is not very effective, against a highly trained combat shooter if he has you in his crosshairs at 30 feet and a boatload of ammo. Thrown weapons like a lot of martial arts, it's most useful against an unarmed attacker. That's the reality. I've been asked before about the likelihood that I'd be actually carrying a tomahawk to be able to use it in the system. And I say the answer is well, I'd be more likely to carry a tomahawk than I would a sword. I know that. So I would be very likely to be carrying tomahawks on my belt rig at my home and on my property, for example. So thrown weapons for self-defense, it can be very valuable for someone interested in protecting themselves against home invasion or property breach by any intruder intent on doing us or our loved ones harm, quite frankly. I always train to throw weapons safely and keep them in my home safely, but at the ready in my home. Everyone should know the layout of their home. Thrown weapons, martial artists, firearms people, or anybody who trains self-defense should know or anybody really should know how to lay the layout of their home for many different reasons. The throws that we do, we need to train no matter where an intruder breaks in. So we lay out our homes out on our property here with sticks and lines, and make it pretty specific when we move around in different directions and figure out where the best place to throw is, and we train those throws. So if somebody's coming in the front door, I know exactly what I need to do to hit the mark. So thrown weapons training is ideal for home and property protection. That being said, I'd strongly suggest a security alarm system, a dog, and some firearms training as well, if you want to be a safe and responsible defender of your home. Many folks say that they prefer guns. In many ways, I do too. I carry a gun myself for personal protection. A gun, however, you must be tactically appropriate for this scenario. You'll have to consider who else is in the vicinity. Bullets travel a lot farther and with much more lethal potential for someone beyond the intended target. when we have to consider when we use firearms, what's beyond the target, or in the stray fire danger zone. It can still cause damage and even be lethal. A thrown weapon will not go through the body, that's for sure. So I guess that's a long answer to a short question.
You have to remember that with any martial art, whether it's a minor martial art or a major or minor martial art, is that there can be different schools in that particular art form. For example, school meaning a school of thought. If you look at the martial art, a major martial art like karate, there's, I believe, 10 different styles of karate, and they're all accepted and respected, but they're different. So too with Shuriken Jutsu, I believe, or any martial art, there can be different styles within the same martial art style. I'm not really sure I like that term too much, but I like to think of it more of as a method or system. But again, if we compare it to a karate, like I said, there's 10 different styles or methods or schools, and school meaning school of thought. So the same can be, I believe, for Shuriken Jutsu or any martial art. Our OSM Shuriken Jutsu is a different school of thought than other traditional methods or schools of Shuriken Jutsu.
Mike, you run what I believe is the only knife-throwing school in the world, a school that's dedicated to combat throwing. What can you tell us about your school, your clientele, and the courses that you offer? It's not every day you run into a knife-throwing school.
Well, our school is dedicated to thrown weapons martial arts. We're relatively speaking new school. Although I've been a certified instructor for several years and I've instructed professionally at private group seminars over the years, our school is officially only in its 5th year. Before that I would travel to clients. Now clients and regular students travel to me, so that's kind of a good deal. We have indoor and outdoor facilities, but I certainly expect students to perform in all types of weather. Although we have indoor facilities, and my students, they know full well to be prepared to throw in the rain, the snow, hot and cold weather. We have over 3 acres of wooded and cleared training areas, obstacle courses, moving target ranges, and you can even throw from a zip line. That's a true story right there. We'll have to get you throwing a tomahawk from a zip line. That'd be pretty cool. But there's nothing quite like it, I'll tell you. But anyway, my clientele is pretty diverse, from doctors, lawyers, to Black Hawk helicopter pilots, Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, folks with no martial arts or throwing experience or background, to martial arts grandmasters. We have a world champion kickboxer. One of my students is a teacher, a high school teacher. I've trained survivalists, law enforcement, firefighters, dog handlers, firearm instructors, current and former military, college, high school students. My granddaughter began throwing at age 6. And most of my 11 grandchildren have thrown knives and tomahawks. If they haven't, they're too young. And too young meaning they're 2 years old, but they certainly hold them anyway. But they've all thrown knives and hawks. My regular students, like I said, range from high school teachers to martial arts professionals who have their own schools. Many of my students hold black belts in other martial arts, such as taekwondo, judo, jiu-jitsu, karate, and ninjutsu, to name a few. So my students are pretty knowledgeable regarding self-defense, and quite frankly, they wouldn't be coming here if they didn't believe that thrown weapons had combative value. Well, maybe they would, because one thing for sure is we have a lot of fun here. But I'm serious about my system and my martial art. But if we're so serious that we can't step away from it from time to time and get a little silly, then I believe we've neglected our spirit, which I believe should include joy. And I believe the spiritual aspect of martial arts has just as much to do with it, with its essence, as the combative element. So I like my students to take themselves seriously, but not too seriously. Our courses all involve throwing weapons. We have 3 black belt programs. Our basic foundational black belt program is the OSM throwing weapons program. It covers basic throws using, excuse me, using multiple styles, methods and practices. Physical conditioning is very important to advance in rank. Another belt program we have is our throwing weapons fighting system. This is a highly combative system of forms based on close quarters combat using knife, hawk, spike. It includes sparring. And we get pretty down and dirty with that. Our other program is the OSM Shuriken-Jitsu belt program, and again, this is not traditional Shuriken-Jitsu. There's certainly traditional elements to it, but like I said before, there are a few differences between OSM Shuriken-Jitsu and traditional Shuriken-Jitsu. Now, the way I've structured the ranking systems is that to be eligible to rank in our fighting system, our Shuriken-Jitsu program students, they first must achieve level 5 brown belt status in the parent program, OSM throwing weapons. And once students are at level 5 brown belt, they can enter the other programs, and theoretically, yet not likely, could achieve black belt in the other programs before black belt in the parent form. So the parent form program is OSM throwing weapons. That's more key on basic fundamentals. The thrown weapons fighting system is more kata forms, to take those terms from karate. Kian, kata, and kumite. So the fighting system is more kata forms and kumite sparring. And the Shuriken-Jitsu program is mostly kian and kata, form, the basic fundamentals, and then forms, and then some advanced throws and techniques. And you're going to have to make some throws over 25 feet, and they're going to have to be no spin throws if you're going to achieve rank at a high level in the Shuriken-Jitsu program.
So, Mike, I've been teaching blade work for close to 20 years, and honestly, in that time, throwing has been a very neglected area of training for me. I have to admit, you've inspired me to try to remedy that. What insights do you have for blade instructors who don't currently work on this aspect of training?
Well, what I tell students and instructors alike is that your goal should be the mastery of one thing, not the mediocrity of many. So I'm going to assume that blade instructors are masters at what they teach. So I guess I'll speak to those instructors. To those I say, you've mastered that aspect of blade training. Why not then open it up to other possibilities? And I believe that blade instructors should be open to explore that there could be other uses for a bladed weapon, beyond holding it in the hand to slash, cut, thrust, and so on, or defend. I believe any true master blade instructor, in any discipline, not just blade instructors, once they understand the basic principles and styles of throwing, they'll figure out their own way and how to best use a thrown weapon in specific scenarios. And I think they'll figure out, after they train it to a high enough level, that it does have more combative value than what they could have imagined had they not trained it before. In my opinion, any master instructor, blade or not, should be able to adapt to any situation using whatever tool is available, whether it's a rock, a spoon, a knife, a door, a roll of yarn, and quite frankly, sometimes training thrown weapons isn't a good fit for certain individuals. It's something that takes a long time to get really, really good at. It really does. And, throwing bladed weapons is very different than throwing a punch. I'm really going to get into something here it's an analogy I use a lot. I compare a throw to a punch, and I'm really simplifying this. It's really, obviously, a lot more complicated than what I'm going to talk about. But to make a point, anyway, if we compare a punch to a throw, we have to use common sense and admit, if we're using common sense, and we're being honest with ourselves, that anyone can throw a punch at a heavy bag and hit it 100% of the time. That's the goal, for a punch when we train it. Throw a punch, hit the target with the fist. Everyone has enough spatial awareness built in to accomplish that goal with 100% success. Now, the goal is a lot different with throwing because there's a disconnect in that we let go of the weapon that we want to hit the target. Unlike a punch, where we have total control of the fist, it never leaves the body. The knife can't really be controlled after we let it go. So, we have to control it enough before we let it go. And this takes a lot of time to master. It takes years. So not everyone can stick a knife as a beginner with 100% success. Whereas a beginner, someone who's never thrown a punch before, can hit a target with a fist every time. Like I said, I'm really simplifying this analogy. Certainly there could be many variables to throwing a punch as well. But comparing the two in their most elementary forms, throwing a knife is more difficult than throwing a punch. For someone who has no experience in either one. So you take someone off the street at random and sit them in front of a heavy bag and ask them to punch it. I think you're looking at about 100% of those people accomplishing that goal. Now, you ask that same person to take a knife and stick it in the target from 6 to 10 feet away, you'll see that 100% success number go down significantly. So I went off on a little tangent there, but to blade instructors, I would suggest training thrown weapons a little bit and see if you might see any combative value in it. But don't make any judgments about it until you've trained it for a while. Honestly, some instructors may not have an aptitude for throwing. In that case, they may be better working, training, and teaching that which they do have an aptitude for. So to each his own, but I do believe a blade instructor should at least be familiar with the basic concepts of throwing a bladed weapon. Sooner or later, a blade instructor is going to have a student that's going to ask, hey, can this thing be thrown? This knife or what I'm working with, can I throw this? What a shame it'd be to not have an answer for that. An answer that should be based on having had the experience of training thrown weapons.
So, Mike, you're not just a hands-on instructor. You're also an author. You've written a lot on the subject of knife throwing. What can you tell us about the products that you have available? How can they help students with their studies?
Well, my first book is available on Amazon.com, Knife and Tomahawk Throwing, the Mike Gross Method. My second book, the OSM Student Handbook and the Mike Gross Thrown Weapons Fighting System, the first edition, that's sold out. But the second edition will be available soon. Instructional videos can be found on our YouTube channel, which is Knife and Tomahawk Academy, Mike Gross. Another great resource, probably the best, is our Facebook page where you can follow us, OSM Knife and Tomahawk Throwers Academy. That's our Facebook page, and you can keep up to date on all the things we do each and every week.
So, Mike, as we wind down with our interview, I want to ask you what parting advice you have for the audience. What words of wisdom can you give to students who wish to pursue their training in thrown weapons?
Well, the best thing is to buy my books. You can buy my books. You can watch my instructional videos on YouTube. That should help you out a lot. Seriously, my books and videos, they're a valuable resource for basic and advanced techniques. Now, at the bottom line, as with anything else in life, you'll get out of it what you put into it. I can't throw the knives for you, you know. Commitment to training is the key, but you have to train properly, you know. Learning bad habits, getting huge steps backwards, that you'll have to make up sooner or later. So you don't want to learn bad habits. You know, if you want to achieve excellence in thrown weapons martial arts, above all, you should have a clearly defined purpose for training this martial art. Have fun, stay safe.
Well, Mike, here's a question that we ask all of our guests. As you know, the Raven Tribe is dedicated to a warrior lifestyle. I'd like to know how you personally view warriorship. And do you follow any formal warrior path or tradition?
Well, that's subjective, certainly. But for me personally, you know, I view warriorship as should have a spiritual purpose. You know, in Jiu-Jitsu, it's called Seshin Teki Kyoyo, or spiritual refinement. To me, my personal opinion and philosophy is that a warrior without a spiritual purpose, man, trains for a selfish purpose and misses what I believe is the essence and foundation of martial arts, which is benevolence, morality, of mind and of action. I'm a Christian, so my life guide is the Bible. I feel the 7 virtues of Bushido are a good example of how to live as a true warrior. I use them as a guide as well. To say I follow any code would be a setup for failure. You know, we're imperfect as humans. We're quite fragile, really. And, you know, I strive to do my best. I fail many times. I've been forgiven many times. And I'm a very forgiving person. You know, warriorship really should be left to be defined by the individual. This day and age, warrior, the term warrior seems to have a singular connotation, you know, like soldier or combatant of a physical nature in physical warfare. Certainly, the true martial artist understands there's much more to being a warrior than a physical fight. I've seen peaceful men and women who pray fervently for others. I consider them warriors. I consider them prayer warriors, fighting against the powers of spiritual darkness. You know, but again, that's up to the individual. But you did ask me how I viewed it, so that's how I view it. But if I were only allowed one warrior path to try to follow, it would be the 7 virtues of Bushido. I think it falls more in line with my Christian faith.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you for being on the show with us. This interview took us a little bit of time to coordinate, but I think it was well worth it. You shared so much great information. And before we go, I'd like to ask you if you can tell the audience at home where people can find you on the web. How can they reach out to you for training or to pick up some of your awesome training products?
You're welcome. I'm always happy to do it. You know, I'm happy to do professional courtesy. People can find us on Facebook. OSM, Oscar Sierra Mike, OSM Knife and Tomahawk Throwers Academy, and on YouTube, it's Knife and Tomahawk Throwers Academy Mike Rose. My custom fighting tomahawk is available pre-order and prepaid only. I don't make many, but I will if someone wants one. Remember, my book, Knife and Tomahawk Throwing the Mike Rose Method, can be found on Amazon.com.
Mike, again, I want to thank you for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully we can get you back on the show in the near future. Thanks again.